It's time again for the Throttle Up Leadership podcast with Dr. John Dentico. The mission of our podcast is to provide 21st century leadership training for a talent-driven world. We help organizations implement strategies and practices designed to attract, hire, engage, and retain top talent while mitigating the effects of burnout. Our guests are experts in various fields of organizational dynamics, including, but not limited to, leadership, management, communication, and coaching. They bring a world of knowledge and solutions to our viewers and listeners. I am sincerely grateful for their participation and ideas. So let's dive in. And if you enjoy our podcast, please like, share, and subscribe. We genuinely appreciate your support. Good morning and welcome again to the Throttle Up Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Dr. John Dentico. This morning, I am joined by Cameron Nathan Singh, who was born and raised in San Bruno, California. He primarily works in the business aviation industry and has a strong passion for leadership and making an impact on younger generations. Over the last decade, Cameron has rapidly advanced in the aviation industry, living in various locations, including New Jersey, Southern California, Chicago, and the Caribbean Twin Islands of Antigua and Barbuda. Cameron holds a doctorate in executive leadership from the University of Charleston and currently resides in northern Colorado. He is also the host and co-host of several podcasts. Cameron is a John Maxwell certified coach, speaker, and trainer. Cameron is also the author of Navigation and Discovery, a path of navigating and discovering through the journey of faith. I am pleased to have him here with me on the Throttle Up Leadership podcast this morning. Good morning, Cameron. How are you this day?
Good morning, John. Thank you for having me on your podcast.
Great to have you here. I'm always looking for interesting guests, as I like to say all the time. My podcast guests make me smarter every day. I look forward to that. I look forward to our exchange and conversation. So, Cameron, let me ask you a question. I'll just start it off by asking this question. One of my more favorite questions, if I may say so. If someone were to walk up to you and ask you for your perspective or your definition of leadership, something they could grasp onto, and what would you tell them? And also, has this idea changed in your mind in the wake of the COVID pandemic?
Mm. Yeah, I think one of the things about leadership that I've always learned, especially from John Maxwell, is that leadership is related to the influence that you have. And one of the things that I learned early on from these many leadership gurus is that you don't necessarily have to be in a leadership position to be a leader. You can have influence, you can have leadership from wherever you are at, whether it's whichever areas of influence that you have. We all have different roles and responsibilities in our day to day, and we all have the ability to influence where we are at.
Leadership is an influence relationship. And I talk about this many times in presentations and podcasts about the fact that it's not about position. It's about the influence that you have as maybe, as I like to say, a go-to person. Every organization has go-to people.
Mm.
God, I'm befuddled by what's going on here today. Let me go talk to Bob, or let me go talk to Janet. They've been here a while. They understand how it works, and they're trusted, and they have such great influence. So I couldn't agree with you more. It is an influence relationship. And I think personally, I don't know, I'd like to hear your comment. It's becoming more apparent in
Yeah.
this hybrid world in which we work today. How do
Mhm.
you, why don't you give me some comments on that?
Yeah, I wanted to expand what I mentioned earlier. It was back in 2016, I went to a conference in Sydney, Australia, and this is where I heard the first time ever about leadership and influence. And I'll never forget, it was Erwin McManus. I was in my young 20s at this time, and I was still in my first leadership role, and I was struggling with my own self-confidence of me being in a leadership role at such a young age. It's like, how can I do this? And you can lead where you're at. You have the ability to influence where you're at, no matter where you're at in your journey of life or your journey of leadership. And that's where something sparked in me. And that's where I would say my journey in leadership started. But to touch on your question about having influence in this hybrid work environment, it's even more important than ever to have really hone in on the influence that you have. And I think it really starts with the people that we surround ourselves with and the relationships that we have and what we're doing to build upon those relationships, because that's where leadership and influence starts. It's like, how are you relating to others? How are you building others and adding value in others? And not only receiving and taking from others, but what are you contributing into the spaces that you're in?
I absolutely agree. I have not had a guest on before in the aviation industry as you are. So I want to ask you a specific question about the aviation industry, just as a because you just sparked that in me as we're
Mm.
having our discussion. What's going on in the aviation industry in terms of leadership? What do you, if you could put your finger on a few things that the challenges, if you will, from a leadership perspective that the aviation industry is dealing with, what would you say? Give me two or three of them, if you would.
Yeah, just to give some context, my background and context is on the private aviation side. So everything that deals with private aircraft, what the industry is called is business aviation. So in the business aviation industry, the industry has been challenged with keeping up with the times. It's changed significantly over the last decade with having more diversity, more women in the workforce. However, there's been a challenge with having a leadership development pipeline of building the next generation of leaders, because historically there's been really these senior leadership roles that have been filled with leaders that have sat in those seats for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And now you have individuals going into these seats with very limited experience. Like myself, I was in roles that were filled before with people that were in those roles for 20, 30 years. And so really not being equipped with how to succeed in those roles. You may be good in your technical skills, meaning you're good at the day-to-day responsibilities of your job, but there's a lack of development and focus on really how can you be equipped? How can you best be equipped to succeed in your role? Because myself and other colleagues in the industry have been put into various leadership roles where you're given the keys, you're given the cell phone, you're given the laptop, and best of luck to you. And if you don't do well, you're walked out the door. And that's really how the industry has been. And the industry has acknowledged this very well. And they are working slowly but surely to engage, especially this new generation coming in, the younger folks, to aspire for higher, aspire for leadership, and not be afraid to aspire for those roles that have been filled by people that have sat in those seats for longer periods of time.
Great. Just for my own clarification, can you give me some of the roles or the job titles, if you will, of where someone like yourself would be asked to fulfill? What, because we know, for example, when I think of a leader role or leadership role in an airport, I think of the airport management
Yeah.
areas and those kinds of things. Talk about the business jets side of it. What kind of jobs are available? Where is the need, if you will, for younger leaders to step up?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because for those that are unfamiliar about business aviation, there's always this little part of every airport where you see nice private jets parked and probably don't know what it is or what it's for. So that's what I primarily work in is what they're called as fixed base operators, also known as FBOs. So that's where the private jets land. And so there are large franchises that exist in that capacity, like a McDonald's or Starbucks in that space. And then there's also mom and pop establishments as well. And so a typical job for a fixed space operator where private jets land would be like an operations manager role or a general manager role where you have oversight of that location. And there are other roles as well. For example, all these private jets, there's different types of ownership. There's charter, so you can charter jets. So there's just like how you can charter a bus or like an SUV. So similar concept. So you need people to lead in those different charter departments. There's also corporations, Fortune 500 companies, Fortune 100 companies that own private jets or have a fleet of private jets. So you need individuals, you need a team dedicated to managing your fleet of aircraft. There are also other establishments such as aircraft cleaning companies, everything that touches these airplanes, maintenance operations. So you need someone to manage these maintenance operation, or maybe you don't know how you want an airplane. You're a rich person and you want an airplane, but don't really know anything about it. There's companies out there that'll take care of the management of the aircraft, they'll staff it, and they'll even help you generate revenue by putting it on a charter for the times when you're not flying for it. So, all of those, that's just a segment of the industry that I'm talking about. And then, of course, there's the aircraft manufacturers that are making these airplanes. And also, yeah, that's just, I guess, a good handful to talk about. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a he's retired now, but I had a great friend of mine fly for NetJets. I'm sure you
Mhm.
know those guys. And anyway, so let's go on in our conversation here and we'll focus back on leadership. But thank you for that because I think that that's such a world that I don't think many people understand that there is a great deal of opportunities there for young
Mhm.
people and people looking for really very interesting positions that cover the gamut of
Yeah.
different things that people can fulfill. A colleague of mine refers to the times today as a time of a great trust deficit. Do you see that? And how important is building trust among teams in the organization? How important is that?
Yeah, I think in today's world, people are desiring trust more than ever. I think there is a trust deficit because there are leaders out there that are falling short of kind of the expectations of their role or even falling short of the expectations of their team. I think being in a leadership role comes with a heavy burden and a heavy weight, and I think oftentimes that burden and weight can be overlooked, and there's a lot of temptations and a lot of things that a lot of responsibility that comes with it, and if you take that for granted and fall short, you end up losing trust of your team, and it's really difficult to earn that back, and I think trust has to relate in parallel to integrity as well. That's something that have strived to do in many of my leadership roles, especially being at a young age. I didn't have the life experience of, just life, and I was in sitting in these senior leadership roles where people twice my age are looking up to me for leadership. And one of the two things I said I would never strive away from is integrity and trust and maintaining those. And it's so difficult to do that because there's a lot of temptations and there's a lot of stuff that other leaders might be getting away with that of, but then you see the way they lead their teams and the way their teams are falling short or they have dysfunction in their teams, and just keeping your leadership foundation on trust and integrity goes a long way, not only for the longevity of your leadership, but also it reflects on your team because you're modeling a type of leadership that is really difficult to model.
I think to me, I say, I'm sure my listeners are getting tired of me here saying this, but trust is transcendent. It
Hmm.
cuts across all the others. It's the most important thing. You don't have a trust, you have no relationship with your people, no
Yep.
relationship with anybody. You're dead in the water, as they say. To use, you could say it's an aircraft without any fuel. So that to me is vitally important. Let's talk a bit now. Let's change our direction just a little bit and talk about culture. Okay. Because you've said that in the past, leaders were able to get away with not focusing on culture. And I want to know what you meant by that and what advice you would give leaders today about the importance of culture.
Yeah, I've had some interesting conversations about this just in the last 4 to 6 months on culture. I think what's been happening from my point of view, from coming from a business aviation context, I think leaders were able to get away with not focusing on culture, meaning that they were so busy and they thought being busy means like they're doing good, they're productive. And oftentimes, what happens is you're so busy, the administrative stuff that encompasses a leadership role can really overtake your days. And oftentimes the people are put on the back burner or you forget to spend time with the team. And now what I'm noticing and also talking with other people in our industry is you can't do that anymore. Meaning you can't get away with not putting your people or your culture at the forefront because we're in a world today where people are desiring for culture, they're desiring for belonging, they want to be a part of something great. They just don't want a job with pay and benefits. They want more, especially this new generation coming in, the Gen Zs and even the millennials. They want culture. And if there's no culture, it's very easy for them to go and move on to another organization because they have that choice today. And they have the choice to go to somewhere else, and I think for a leader to be truly successful is not only do what we talked about is trust and integrity earlier, but also have the culture at the forefront of everything that they do. And the other stuff, a secondary. Of course, the administrative stuff is important. Meeting your budget is important. But the greatest asset within your organization or team is the people. And if you're not spending time with them, looking after them, being the backbone of your team, it makes the rest of it not meaningful.
You and I are orbiting around the same planets. There's just absolutely no doubt about it. Yeah, my focus now is much more on attracting, hiring, and retaining top talent and mitigating the effects of burnout. That's really where I'm diving headlong into that area. So let me just peel that onion back a little bit. In terms of business aviation and your experience, tell me about the struggle for talent. Is there a struggle for talent?
Mhm.
And if so, could you expound on that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think the based on my experience in this industry, there's been a real struggle to retain talent within the industry because there are so many different jobs in the industry. And what I'm noticing too is as a person that's fresh out of college, I think the expectation is, okay, I'm ready for leadership, ready to move up the ranks very quickly. But the reality is, in some contexts, in some situations, you have to start somewhere, meaning you have to start at a frontline level, frontline roles, and this has been since I started in the industry. College grads are not willing and this is through my experience because I've almost terminated every college graduate that I've had under my tenure because they never really worked out because they were never willing to do the work needed to build that experience, to understand what the business is all about in order to go to the next level. And so it's been a real challenge not only to find talent, but also to retain them in the industry, and there is a talent shortage right now in our industry. I've been talking to companies and positions are longer more than ever. Before you were able to find talent very quickly, fill positions very quickly, and now they're just open longer than ever. And I think a lot of it has to do with, is this person going to fit within our culture? And that's a lot of questions that I'm getting right now is is this person going to fit within culture? Because now culture is being brought to the forefront. Is like, how do we preserve this culture? Because how many times have we seen toxic people enter the work environment and they just deplete the culture of the organization or team? And so it's really difficult now to find that right person that is going to fit with the organization because we don't want them to stay for just a year or two. We want them to stay for a longer term. We want to grow and invest in them and develop them into like a leadership development pipeline to take on growth and further roles as the older generations are exiting the industry.
I it's like an echo chamber. I'm hearing the same things. I'm dealing with the same things in my work. I like to talk about the big three are number in terms of hiring and retaining top talent. As far as I see, is number one. You talk about culture. People want to be associated with an organization whose values align with their own. Number two is people want to be involved in the decision making processes of the organization. People want to matter and they want their work to matter. They
Yeah.
want to become masters of their own fate. And number three is they want training and learning that develops them professionally. And I will tell you, I have interviewed guests from England. I've been speaking to someone in Australia. The other day, I was with Evan from Germany. This is a global thing. This is not just in the United States. Finding good talent, willing to put in the time, is a global thing. And when I talk about, I want to make this point because it's important. Because I'm seeing some other things that are going on. I'm getting in looking across the internet, if you will, and seeing what other people are talking about. When we talk about, and I think you've agreed with this already, when we talk about people wanting to have values alignment, that doesn't mean that every person who walks through the door is going to be aligned with the organization's values. And they have to figure out, is this person a good fit? Is this person a good fit with us? Or are we going down this road again? As you said, we may have to let them go very quickly because they're
Mhm.
just, but the goal is, of course, is to understand that. And I think it has to become the three major messages of any organization who's looking to hire and retain people is this is what we're about. Values alignment. We're about getting you involved early and we're about giving you the training and learning to make you better in every way. Any response to that?
Yeah, I think when in kind of my hiring experience as it evolved, I know early on I made terrible decisions for hire. I would not hire anyone that breathes. And that was early on when I was in my early 20s and I learned a lot from that. And I think now I'm more interested on the person, meaning who they are, what they stand for, background, experience, education, those are great. Those are great to have on paper on a resume. And I don't take that lightly, but really who is the person? Do they value, if they're a family person, do they value family? What do they do outside of work? Because it tells a lot about that person and how they're going to perform in the work environment. What's their why? Where do they see themselves? I think understanding those, and we often ask those in those like leadership type interviews, and why not ask those same questions, behavioral type questions, in if we're hiring like frontline or entry level positions to really understand the person, because all the ones that have terrible values or maybe have no really wishy-washy in terms of the way they respond, those ended up not working out. And the people that are really clear on their why, their values, whether they're the family person, a mother or a father, you see those individuals perform better in the work environment. And actually some of the best hires that I've had through my experience were people that didn't know anything about aviation, didn't study aviation, and were from random industries. And those were the best ones because they needed a job to support their family. They wanted to learn something new and they thought it was pretty cool job and they wanted to learn more and more, and which was great to see.
Yeah, I can understand that. And I did a presentation earlier this year at Fence Tech, which is all the fence builders in America. And one of the gents asked me, he got into this trying to sell the company, if you will, to the person. And I did exactly what you said. I said, wait a minute, where are you going? Relax. You find out about this person. Who are they? Why did How come they got through your door? What do they want? What do they bring to the table, if you will, in a way that uncovers their motivation, their where do you know? And I tell people this all the time: what gives that person meaning in life?
Yeah.
What means something to that person? Because if you can touch that, if you can find that out, now you're talking about not you motivating them, but them being motivated. Where the true, in my opinion, where the true motivation comes from. So I absolutely agree with you, and I appreciate those comments. Let me go on to this because I know this is a subject near and dear to your heart. I'll just ask you this, and I think you've covered a lot of it. Let's just go down that road a little bit. Do you think that young people have a place in an organization as a leader? And how would you advise a young person to establish themselves as a leader in, let's say, the business aviation industry?
Yeah, I think leadership is available and out there for everyone across all generations, all ages, all backgrounds. But I'm really passionate about young people going into leadership roles or aspiring for leadership because I was one where I was given the opportunities for growth. I was given opportunities where people believed in me in situations where I didn't. And I think though young people can become a bit too ambitious. Like I was very ambitious. I wanted to shoot the stars and become CEO of the company that I worked for a little over a decade. And I realized that wasn't the reality. I had to go through a process, had to go through different experiences to be able to get to maybe not where I wanted to be, but where I could thrive in my leadership. And I think the first thing is you need to learn how, as for young people, is how are you going to set yourself apart from the crowd? And I think that's a real challenge because, especially if you're in a competitive environment, meaning there are other young people aspiring for the same roles or same positions, is how are you going to set yourself apart and not only that, but how do you balance focusing on yourself, your selfish desires, versus what value you're adding to your team and organization? And that was a real challenge for me that I struggled with because it was all about me and the accolades that I got, the promotions that I got. And I realized that those accolades don't matter. It's what am I adding? What value am I adding to my colleagues, my team, my organization? Am I voicing my opinions? Am I voicing my ideas? And that's another thing too. Sometimes if you're in a room with experienced people, it's a little bit more seasoned individuals, it can be very intimidating to voice your opinions. And I think taking the courage to speak and you deserve a seat at that table, and people wanna hear you, and all you have to do is just speak, say your ideas, even though they sound crazy. Some of my craziest ideas were some of the best ideas. Some of the craziest ideas I heard from my team were the some of the best ideas because I never thought about that stuff, and people wanna hear from you because you're closest to the clients or the customers or the operation. And so I think truly that's what I would provide encouragement to for young people that are aspiring for higher, aspiring for more is don't be afraid and focus on what value can you add to where you're at.
Agreed. Uh, Agreed. The leadership model that I created, I started working on 30 years ago, is based on one simple element, one simple baseline, and that is I refer to it as a collaborative leadership model, and it's based on one thing: contribution. Right? Just contribution. Create a safe environment where people can say whatever they want to say, as you say, as crazy it may sound at the moment. I invite you to offer because you never know where a great idea is going to come from. And I think for me, this is the model that moves people forward and organizations forward is getting people involved again in the decision making processes so that they feel worth. They feel as though they have a level of control and autonomy over their own destinies. I think that's such a gravitational, if you will, pull for people in many organizations. So I agree completely. And thanks for showing your vulnerable side here in terms of saying, hey, I messed this up. I didn't get this right the first few times around. I don't think anybody gets it right the first few times around. But the ability to say, listen, I'm not the smartest guy in the room here. I'm looking together. We may be the smartest people in business aviation if we work this problem together. So I think that's really great. I'm getting ready to finish off here with you, and I just will ask you my traditional last question, and that is if you had a magic wand and you could change anything as you see it in your world right now, in the business aviation world, what would that one thing be, and why, if you will, did you choose that?
If I had a magic wand in the business aviation industry is to, um, remove all the bad leaders in our industry that are holding down organizations, holding down teams, and that are not being held accountable. And I think that's not only relevant for this industry, but for industries across the board. I think what happens traditionally is leaders are put in positions and they swing their weight however they want and get away with it, whether or not they treat their people good or bad. And that's one thing that I would change is that get rid of all the bad leaders and then put in leaders that have true focus on team, culture, and where they stand on integrity and trust and stick to their values as well.
Do you see those changes coming though, as the newer folks like yourself, younger people getting involved now? Do you see that there is a shift, if you will, in the business aviation industry?
Yeah, I say that there is a shift. Slowly but surely, there is a shift coming, but of course, it'll take some time as we start peeling the onion of leadership within our industry and realizing that especially when these organizations it's already happening where organizations are having challenges of hiring leaders instead of going out and hire leaders, why not develop your people within? And
If
so that's a question coming at the forefront right now is how can we do that?
this notion of when I was a naval officer, we used to call it grow your own. Oh, you've got the guy. I would say traditionally, as long as I have somebody with a good attitude, I could train them to do anything.
Yeah.
I had people, good people working with me. We could train them, we could make them great and train them and give them the training and learning that they could build upon. Just give me a good attitude. Just, I want to learn. I want to come in here. I want to do what I need to do to be successful. I'm your guy. I'm your guy. I'm gonna take really good care of you, and we're gonna make sure that you grow within the organization. So I've always believed that growing your own was a very powerful tool. Anyway, Cameron, I can't thank you enough. You've been a spectacular guest, and I appreciate your insights into the entire business aviation community, something that I rarely, if ever, touch upon. But I think it's so important to look across the spectrum, across the horizon of industries, whether it's healthcare, building fences, or seeing the same kinds of things as the younger generations come along. But there are commonalities. And the commonalities for me are, as you said, trust, integrity, honesty, forthrightness, if you will. These are very important commonalities. And if we can use that as the hub of the wheel, I think we can really get some great talent into organizations and carry the organization and the industry forward. Again, thank you so very much for your time. I wish you all the best in the future. And thank you for you and all my listeners here on the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast. Dr. John Dentico saying, remember, leadership is what people do together. Thanks again.